I think, positive sexual health it's a good thing. And bringing it more into the conversation through these books it's good for a lot of people.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey, Storytellers. We're your hosts, Allie and Kristy. We're here to tell you sometimes the journey sucks, but doesn't that make for the best stories? All right. Well, welcome back to Emerald Coast Storytellers. We've got a stellar guest for you guys today, Miss Meredith Wild. Meredith Wild is a #1 New York Times, USA Today, and international bestselling author. She refers to herself as a techie, whiskey appreciator, and sun worshiper. After publishing her debut novel, Hardwired, in September of 2013, Wild used her 10 years of experience as a tech entrepreneur to push the boundaries of her self-published status, becoming stocked in brick-and-mortar bookstore chains nationwide and forging relationships with the major retailers. In 2014, Wild founded her own imprint, Waterhouse Press, under which she hit #1 on the New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestsellers lists. She has been featured on CBS This Morning, The Today Show, The New York Times, The Hollywood Reporter, Publishers Weekly, and The Examiner. Her foreign rights have been sold in over 23 languages. Thank you, Meredith, for being with us today. Woohoo!
Yay! Thanks for having me.
We're stoked you're here. It's probably so weird to hear your bio just read to you like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long career at this point, like 10 years just about. So yeah, just kind of takes me back to all those little moments. Nice to hear it occasionally.
Occasionally. Right, yeah. Yeah, that was pretty much the intro we did so we had you at our December Storytellers at Distillery 98. That was probably one of my favorite events thus far. I mean, hands down, like, not only the atmosphere of the night, but just having you as our guest and having you up there. And I mean, I think at one point you had answered a question, how many books you had written. And you were like, actually, I've written 21 books, right?
Yep.
Is that number correct?
It's 22 now.
22. I think at this point we like put in the applause, like it's like a sitcom or something. It's like the audience applause. For applause. Yeah. That's amazing. We're still struggling with our first books, but you're an inspiration.
Well, every book's a struggle. It doesn't get any easier, sorry to say.
No. So you started in the tech world. Will you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. So I had kind of dabbled in graphic design when I was in college. And when I graduated, I decided I wanted to start my own company and do like website design. So I just had this little shop that I ran out of my garage and just did little jobs.
It's so like Steve Jobs, Steve Ballmer.
Yeah, literally out of my garage. And it was fun. But at that time, and this is really going to date me, but this MySpace was kind of coming into popularity at the time. And there was a need for like customized MySpace design. And so yes.
Did you put like the music in the background? Like you had to like code, like the HTML?
Yeah, all of it. Yeah. But the cool thing was it was such a niche kind of service that I ended up working with like a lot of cool brands like universities, Interscope Records. And so I really kind of established myself in that weird little niche space. And then by way of working in social networking, I started to get inquiries from clients about actually building out their own social network. So something that was like MySpace for dentists or, just something, specific to different industries or interests. And so that's when my company evolved to more of a software development company. And that's when we really started to grow. And at one point I had like 10 people working under me. And yeah, it was a really interesting journey to work in tech, especially as a woman. And it's such a fast pace, environment too, because it's constantly changing. You're constantly trying to keep up with technology. So.
When did you work for Interscope, or when did you work with Interscope?
It was when I was doing the MySpace designs, because there was, there was probably like 2 or 3 people doing it. And I was one of them.
How did they find you?
Just online, keyword search.
Yeah, I'm having flashbacks to my MySpace page. As we speak, it was like, I don't know, like Starbucks, the pictures.
Oh my God, I can't. I mean, it's in the archives of the internet somewhere.
Yeah.
I lost the password. It's probably a good thing. Hopefully no one else can access that.
It just, it deserves to be hidden, I think. Well, at least mine does. It's going to stay down there for sure.
So at what point did you make the leap to writing? Like how did this tech career kind of create this, I guess, pave the way for this creative path?
Right. So I was in this industry for almost a decade. And the nature of it, the model of the company was really like service oriented. So we were only kind of doing as well as our last project. The economy had, started to kind of downturn toward the end of it. So it was a lot harder to get jobs, a lot harder to make payroll. And it became a pretty significant source of stress for me, trying to keep the business going. I also had 3 little kids over this whole time span. So I had a lot on me, and I really needed ways to de-stress when I wasn't working. Any entrepreneur can tell you it's very hard to, really set it down at the end of the day. And so I had a coworker give me a copy of 50 Shades of Grey. And she said, "You have to read this." And I'm like, okay. I kind of heard some rumblings about it, but I didn't really know what I was getting into. Anyway, so I read it and I was like, holy bananas, this is spicy.
Spicy, saucy.
But of course, very entertaining, enjoyable read, read the whole series. And I was like, I could probably read some more of this type of writing. Mm-hmm. And so I started looking for other romance, erotic romance. That was kind of more mainstream like that. And I think I must have read through like maybe 4 or 5 more novels. And at one point I was like, hey, I have an English degree. I think that I might actually be able to do this. Like I might actually be able to write my own story. And one of the things that motivated me was, not to knock on any tropes or, anyone's writing, the way they portray romance in their stories. But like coming from the tech background and being the CEO of my own company for so many years, I was really interested in reading about heroines that had a little bit more going for them. Mm-hmm. Like, I felt like a lot of the heroines I was reading were like administrative assistants, or one of them, she was homeless. So I'm like, come on, guys, let's let's give her something, Mm-hmm. And so, I guess I had this interest. They say write the story you want to read, and I think that really drove me to actually put pen to paper, and start writing my own story.
Because that is something that we wanted to talk to you about is, how did you get into writing romance, which it sounds like 50 Shades of Grey was the gateway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've definitely written, I've written a romantic suspense, heavily suspense series. All of the books that I've written, for the most part, have some sort of suspense element. Mm-hmm. I am interested in other genres, but I do find that the romance kind of storyline and the tropes are like attractive to me. I feel like I can like settle into those storylines easily. I think that I am a romantic at heart too. Mm-hmm. Just the kind of entertainment. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the entertainment that I appreciate, shows and stuff. I'm always like, I'm in it for the romance. And as soon as like somebody dies, there's a breakup, I'm like, I'm out.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's one of the attractive things about writing romance is that most of the time the characters at the end have a happy ending.
Right. Yeah. And I think that a lot of people have opinions about romance readers and, romance novels and the quality of the writing. Mm-hmm. But it is that kind of, and it is formulaic, but what comes with that is a little bit of comfort. Like, mm-hmm. I think that you have these rabid romance readers who, there are people who read a book a day, mm-hmm. all year round. Mm-hmm. And like, they like that familiarity. They want to know that they're not going to be totally crushed at the end of the book. There is going to be a happily ever after. they appreciate that journey and they know what to expect. So.
I mean, look at the rise of romance, adaptions of romance novels in TV and in movies right now. And I mean, even look at the popularity of that one series, A Court of Thorn and Roses.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's always been, widespread. I mean, romance novels are not. This is not a new concept.
It's a billion-dollar industry, and I guess that's the other side of it. Is like for the kind of elitists that knock the genre. It's like, well, the demand speaks for itself.
Knock until you try it.
It's what
I
the
still
people
remember.
want.
The 50 Shades of Grey craze. Now I'm going to date myself. I was in high school when it came out, and I still remember all of us, we went to like this beach house in Monterey with my family and a couple of our friends. And we were just like, all the girls just were nonstop talking about it. And my dad had his iPad and I walked by it and I read the top and I was like, Dad, are you reading 50 Shades of Grey? And he's like, how did you see that? But he's like, eventually he's like, all right, I had to see what all the fuss was about. Cause of course my mom's calling it 50 Shades of Sex. And I don't know, Allie and I were talking about this. My husband and I recently started listening to the podcast Sex with Emily. Have you heard about that? It's so good. But I don't know, just one of my favorite things about romance novels and, listening to this podcast, it's the transparency around sex and relationships. And it's such a natural thing. And it's there's a reason why shows and movies like Game of Thrones and Bridgerton and 50 Shades are so popular. I think it gives people this cathartic release, this human instinct in all of us. And I mean, even being pregnant, it's so funny because it's everyone's emphasizing the baby, but no one, I mean, maybe that's a good thing that no one's asking about my sex life, but it's it's just
they
so
want to
funny.
ask.
There's there's a reason why there's people want that need. It's there's this release and it kind of fuels something inside them. Is that kind of a little bit what led you to it, would you say?
Yeah, I think as a reader I appreciated that. I think that in our culture and really especially American culture, sexuality as much as it's used in marketing is very stigmatized.
Mm-hmm. It's this taboo thing.
I would completely agree.
And it's this weird contradiction that, everybody's doing it, nobody's allowed to talk about it, but we're allowed to have all these sexualized images marketed to us constantly.
It's
so true.
removing the emotion from the act, right? Because there's all of these adult feelings that go into having sex, which I feel is not normally packaged together when it's Burger King selling you a burger with, somebody sexy sitting on the front of a hood of a car.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think especially for women, I think, there aren't a lot of forums to really talk openly and explicitly about sex, about, what feels good, what doesn't feel good, what do we need, communicating with our partner, how to communicate with your partner. And even though, erotic romance is, part of that is these explicit scenes, it does kind of it makes it more approachable, I think. And I mean, I know this because I've had so many people write to me over the years and be like, you've changed my sex life. I felt more in touch with myself, more in touch with these feelings and experiences and feeling validated that I can, have these feelings and also have conversations with my partner, or my partner's reading the books now and it's exciting for us. So, I think, positive sexual health it's a good thing, and bringing it more into the conversation through these books it's good for a lot of people.
I read some of your hacker series and I remember being on planes and public places. I'm ooh, some of the scenes I'm you're so you're writing so evocative with it, and it was so fun to read. And it is funny when you're reading this hot, sexy romance novel in these public places, and it's your own little secret, and
you're in an airport.
Yeah. How is that from a writing standpoint? Okay, my mom's gonna read this or my friend's gonna read this. How is that jump for you?
So when I first started writing Hardwired, I was writing it completely in secret, except for my husband at the time knew. But nobody else knew that I was writing, and nobody else knew that I had published. my first book. And so I didn't tell anybody until maybe about 6 months later when I hit the USA Today list for the first time. And then I finally started telling some people. But I think that kind of going into it with that anonymity was helpful because I didn't have to have those conversations in my head about like, envisioning people that I know reading it. And then by the time I got to that point where people were reading it, it's like, okay, I felt like, established, and I had turned this into my career, and I didn't have anything to worry about or be ashamed of. So
and by then you're a New York Times bestseller, so it's like, hey, I know what I'm doing, clearly.
Right.
Can I ask, just because it's so interesting, I mean, what did that feel like when you knew that you were going to be getting on the USA Today and the New York Times bestseller? Like, okay, so was this, so you wrote your first book, Hardwired, while you were still running your company?
Right.
And then you published it and you were still running your company. At what point did you end up shifting more into writing and less into the company you had at the time?
So I published my fourth book, and it was the first book in another series, actually. I stepped out of the hacker series for a minute to chase another story. And at that point, the marketing that my husband at the time was doing really started to take off. And just financially, it was possible at that point to transition out of my business, which was a goal, obviously, because I was having a whole lot more fun writing than running the company. I was kind of burnt out and tired of it and ready to move on to something new. And this was a very exciting new venture to be a part of. So at that point, I got out of my old business. I established a full publishing company kind of around my books and staffed it. And so when I wasn't like building the business, the infrastructure of it, I was writing. And it was my fourth book, my fifth book, the fourth book in the Hacker series that went to number one. And yeah, that was a really cool moment. And I remember my kids were still little, so much more little than they are now. But they ran into my office and they're like, "Hey, mommy, why are you crying?" And I was like, "I just hit number one." And they like came in and gave me a big bear hug. It was so sweet. And yeah, I mean,
moment.
Yeah, just knowing that like it had come from, my own efforts. Like obviously it's an amazing thing to happen under any circumstances, but not having been under a publisher at that point, and it was a journey to get there, but I was really proud of myself.
I mean, my gosh, like not only did you, get on these lists, but you did it completely on your own accord. I mean, where is that sitcom applause? We need it right now.
I know. And I love the story that you told at the December event, just talking about how when you went out to get an agent, you just were like cold calling and like sending, cover letters and yada, yada, yada. Can you tell everybody about kind of that experience?
Yeah. So my first agent actually reached out to me after I hit the USA Today list low on the list through like a promotion, a BookBub promotion. And he represented his agency represented some other really big authors. So I was extremely excited and I was like, this is it. Everything's going to change now. And so it was kind of an interesting journey because he was like, well, once you reach, I think he said something like 100,000 sales, come talk to me and we'll like pitch it. And I was like, oh, well, that's like far, away from where I am right now. So I was like, okay, if that's what I need to do, then I'm just going to dig in and I'm going to do that. So I got to that number of sales and he was like, well, if you haven't, you need this many books in the series or whatever and then I'll take it. So it was like, he kept moving the marker and I was like, okay. So then I get back to work. And then, the funny thing is that like by the time I was so successful that it was like, you could not deny, like, you have to bring this to publishers now. But at that point I was making so much money as a self-published author, like it didn't really make a huge amount of sense to go with a publisher anymore. So it's like his value kind of diminished and he was like, oh, well, we can take it out to publishers now. I'm like too late. Well, whatever.
Like I already did it on my own.
Right.
And now a message from our sponsor.
At Beachy Blooms, their mission is simple: to provide you with a unique bouquet experience handpicked by you. If you're lucky enough to call the Emerald Coast home, look for their flower cart at local farmers markets, special events, and pop-up venues, or hit them up for personal delivery. Visit beachyblooms38.com to learn more. And now, back to our show. Can you also talk about maybe that time in between you were writing your first novel, which, I mean, obviously it was a success. Everything that you were doing at that time was a success. But, you know, starting to get serious about writing that first novel, maybe being like, you know what, this is it. Like, I love what I do. I love my company, but I need to get serious about writing that first novel.
Yeah, well, I was motivated to try it. I had no idea if I was going to be able to take it over the finish line. I had a false start on a story. I had gotten maybe 3 or 4 chapters into it. And I was like, I don't know. I'd never written fiction before. Like, I'd written volumes of business emails.
That counts.
Your English degree, there's not a lot of fiction writing occurring there. So I felt kind of out of my depth. So at that point, I found an editor to help me. And I was like, here's my chapters, like, read them over. Let me know what you think. Am I moving in the right direction? Whatever. So she's a very intense editor. So she redlined everything. And I was like, oh no, I felt really discouraged. And at that point, she had asked me a lot of questions about the story, like, where's the story going, this and that. And I was like, I don't think this is working. Like, I don't think I have it here. And so I set it down for, I don't know, maybe a month or 2. And then my day job, I was running the company, and I was trying to kind of build out this software project on the side. It was unrelated to the clients that I was working with. It's like a lead management software. And I was part of the CEO group at the time. And they were like, well, you should talk to your contemporaries. You should talk to other people who have gone farther in the software as a service industry and get their feedback. And I was like, well, there's this one company, but they're huge. And I don't know that I would be able to. They're like, try, just reach out to the CEO and just try. And I was like, well, whatever. So I went on LinkedIn and I messaged this guy, the CEO of FreshBooks, and he wrote me back within 30 minutes. And I was like, oh my God. I was shaking, sweating. I'm like, he's like, yeah, just give me a ring and we'll talk. And I'm like, felt totally unprepared, but I got it together. And so I called him and I asked him all these questions and advice. And he was super nice, incredibly helpful, offering up, whatever he could provide. And he also had an extremely sexy voice.
Makes everything better.
Be honest, did you write that into one of your books?
And so this became the catalyst for the next story that I wrote. So I just permanently shelved the other story. And this is kind of where the Hacker series began, was this, sexy, unapproachable, not like the guy I was talking to, hero meets the heroine who's kind of has this fledgling software company, and he's like the mentor and blah, 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 power play. The rest is history. And so I think I kind of fell in love with this story in a new way that helped me push through, because it was so close to my own experiences, with what I was doing with tech. And this was the right setting to write that kind of heroine that I was wanting to. And I think it really was my passion for the story that helped me kind of finish it. We also had started to do some early marketing. So that was encouraging that people are I posted a few chapters on my website and people are really eager to read the rest.
Nice.
So that helped. Yeah.
Funny how the universe gives you signs sometimes.
Right.
Yeah, no, you're doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, CEO of this major company. Yeah, here's my personal cell phone number. Just give me a ring.
Right.
Answers the phone, that sexy voice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how was that? Because I'm kind of taking on a similar project where the character, the protagonist in my book is kind of a girl after my own heart, and I think that's kind of, it's blocked me in the past because it's almost you don't want to put her through too much shit, because it's oh, well, this, I see so much of myself in this. And I've had mentors in the past be you need to write about someone that's not at all like you, literally change the gender, change everything. But I keep coming back to this story and this character So how was that like writing, essentially with someone that's kind of a character after your own heart a little bit?
Right. Yeah. I mean, Erica Hathaway was like a carbon copy of me in many, many ways. So
love
I
that.
think it made it easier for me, when I was making that first attempt at fiction. Now I'm more experienced with character development, and, I am more practiced in like getting in a completely different persona and owning that and feeling like, free creatively to explore that. But I think that first endeavor, it was helpful to have somebody that I could be like, well, what would I do? What would I say?
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true.
Write what you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How does it feel to look back on some of your early writing? Is it like looking back at like old pictures of yourself,
Your old MySpace page.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's any avoiding that, I mean, if you're not on a growth journey, I mean, what's the point? So, and the more you do something, obviously, the better you're going to get at it. I mean, I think, yeah, you're going to have turning points at different points in your career where you're like, yeah, your first book is going to be like, feel a little cringy about it. But I mean, honestly, though, I have looked back like at different times and like read a few chapters and I'm like, oh, that's not so bad. Yeah, I did okay.
It's so funny, and I feel like I mention this all the time, but Kristy wrote the first draft of her novel that she's working on right now. She's got a first draft of it, and it
Whatever
is
number that draft is.
yes, we'll complete it.
First complete draft, yeah.
And it is sitting on a shelf like above her desk, and I think it's so funny that because I've written like my stuff as well. And I always say that when you write that first iteration, that first draft of whatever you're working on, you always take it out back and bury it, and then you start again.
Yeah.
And I love that it holds true.
I got it like bound and like not laminated, but took it to UPS. I was like, okay, let me like make this feel like a book.
And it's like just sitting up there, just looking at you.
It's like,
how's it going? How's the writing?
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask kind of, I mean, first, what is your stance on writer's block? Because there's some people that say, oh, it doesn't exist. But it's like, I mean, there are these fears that come up, those, perfectionist tendencies, those like, what is your biggest block?
Yeah, well, I was one of those people that didn't believe in writer's block.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. But I soon learned that it does occur. Yeah, I think. I don't know.
What's your biggest obstacle then when it comes to writing? Like making time?
Probably time. Yeah. I mean, for me, I like a certain kind of environment to create. Like if I'm having, like I can get my best writing done if I have like a block of 5 or 6 hours, but who has a block of 5 or 6 hours? So it's really hard for me. I haven't quite figured out how to like get my head into my writing in short, blocks. And yeah, I kind of, with 3 kids, obviously, it's, and also once I started running the business and started publishing other authors, I had a lot less time for writing my own books. So yeah, I mean, it's time, I would say, is definitely the biggest issue.
I feel like I'll have 5 or 6 hours just like on a random Saturday or something, and I'll just spend it looking at my computer, looking at that blank page and not actually writing anything down.
Or like, I have so much time. Let me clean the entire house and then get to writing.
My house is so clean. Yep.
It's like all of a sudden,
procrastinating writer.
Yeah, you're picking up a new hobby. And it's like, wait, no. This is the exact opposite of what I'm supposed to be doing.
How did I end up at Burger King?
So you did mention, and it's part of your, entrepreneurial journey, but you did establish your own publishing house, your own imprint, which is Waterhouse Publishing.
Right. Waterhouse Press. Yep.
Waterhouse Press.
Yeah. So basically, once I wrote the 4 books, and I did finally get the attention of a publisher who was willing to make a serious investment in what I had built with the series. So I took a pretty large deal with Hachette. Grand Central Publishing. And then what I did from there was, I had built this kind of infrastructure already with this team, but I no longer had my books. So I was like, well, I'd like to do for other authors what I was able to do for myself. And so the first author that we actually published was my editor.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
So the
Full
editor
circle.
that I had been working with, and she's now a #1 New York Times bestselling author, and she's incredibly successful, very prolific.
I mean, that's incredible, having not only yours on the best-selling list, but also your authors on there as well.
And what a way to pay it forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you find authors that you want to work with?
Well, initially we really just were like hand selecting people like that had, we had a particular model that worked well with series, long running series, erotic romance in particular, people that could publish, quickly, not like a year between releases. And so, yeah, Helen was an easy pick. She's an excellent writer. We picked up Audrey Carlin. She had significant backlist of books too, and she was writing a series that published every month. And so her series actually went to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list.
Oh, her too?
Her too.
Oh, wow. I mean, who hasn't at this point? You know what I mean?
So we had a very kind of specific model that worked. So that's kind of just finding people whose writing we liked and, fit what we were doing.
And it's mostly romance, you said, right?
Yes, it's all romance.
So with your mentorship stuff, is that mostly romance too?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty well known in the romance circles. Kind of the big joke is people be like, "You're famous." I'm like, well, only in certain hotels and certain conferences. Yeah, a little microcosm where I'm well known for what I've been able to achieve in the industry. So yeah, those are people that I typically work with.
Yeah, the pen name, I'm sure. You can kind of choose when you can come out. And
And are you finding them like online? Like, are these self-published kind of people, like who are putting their work on like Amazon or on their own website? Okay.
Yeah. I'd say most people are self-published or endeavoring to self-publish. Yeah.
Do you ever spend any time on like Wattpad or anything like that?
Yeah, I have some stories on Wattpad.
Yeah.
I started to write one of my books, Misadventures of a Virgin, on Wattpad chapter by chapter. It just was like a fun little exercise for me to like keep going with the book. So yeah, that's a fun platform.
I love Wattpad. This is actually one of my favorite facts, and this ties into kind of everything that we've been talking about. But the 50 Shades of Grey, and I could be wrong. I mean, I think I'm right. But the 50 Shades of Grey started out as a fanfic of Twilight.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure it was published on Wattpad.
I know that it was definitely Twilight fan fiction. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
which I think it definitely helped its success because, I mean, obviously the Twilight mania, I was part of it. Admit it.
Oh, yeah, me too.
I can still remember the day I got a box set of all of the books. And my life hasn't been the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. One of my like embarrassing fun facts. I've never finished. Well, I finished like 1.5 Harry Potter books, but like my husband is like blown away. He's like, "How have you not read Harry Potter?" I was like, "I was busy reading Twilight."
Right.
You're like, I wasn't a nerd. No, I'm kidding.
Love vampires. Vampire love stories and love triangles all the way.
Yep.
I mean, yeah.
So what's been your favorite book or series that you've worked on thus far? Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that I wrote a romantic suspense series. It was heavily suspense. It was like a sexy Jason Bourne.
Oh, yeah.
And that is definitely the project that I'm most proud of. It was really hard to write. Growling.
It's okay
We'll
to
get
add
lunch
to it.
after.
Yes.
It was definitely the hardest series to write. But I was definitely most proud of it because I really had to step outside my comfort zone. I couldn't just write about feelings. I had to do a lot of research about, guns and crime and all these, different topics that were very interesting. I'm probably on an FBI watch list for all the things I had to
I was just
Google.
about to say, I was like, your
Yeah,
Google search must
for
be
sure.
great.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was like,
She's getting
"Ugh."
targeted ads for all sorts of stuff.
I feel like when I'm writing and researching, I'm just like Googling the most random things. And I'm
Right.
like, gosh, if someone was like tracking this, they would
Your
be like,
FBI
"What's
agent is like,
happening?"
what is
Yeah.
going? What is she doing? Let's check on her.
Well, I guess moving forward, you mentioned kind of some memoir stuff that you're working on. What do you kind of have in the docket, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of big personal changes in my life the past few years. I mean, I think it's been really intense for everybody going through a global pandemic and reevaluating all of the things that are important or not important. I've gone through a divorce and really kind of had to rebuild my life in a lot of ways. And so I think when people are contemplating starting a memoir, they're like, oh, do I have enough life experience? Like, at what point do you stop and start to look back and create these little vignette stories? And I felt that was, a significant enough turning point. And so I have started kind of putting something together slowly. No plans for an immediate release or anything, but yeah, I'm starting to kind of branch out and explore different ways of writing.
It's interesting because it's like you're the character, right?
Yeah, and it really makes you appreciate how you can hide your truth in fiction normally.
That's what I always say about writing horror. I mean, it's so funny. I say this every time, but we all have different genres that we enjoy writing in. Like yours is romance and suspense. Kristy's is writing about relationships, especially with herself and with other people in her family. And mine is horror.
Yeah.
The way that you can use different elements to represent something larger, like anxiety or depression or domestic violence. It's couched in something larger than life.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a great opportunity to work things out and express different parts of your personality through different characters too. Like, not necessarily just the heroine, like the wacky side characters and the villains and it's all good therapy too at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's probably why people enjoy reading romance as well, because the big feelings that they have and that they don't know how to express and were never exposed to and how to express. I mean, it's being laid out in books like that.
Yeah. Well, tell our listeners where they can find you and, kind of keep tabs on your memoir to be and different projects and, stuff with Waterhouse Press.
Sure. Yeah. You can find, my whole backlist, everything I've written at meredithwild.com. I have a lot of series that are in Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, the usual places that you pick up books. And Waterhouse has an amazing offering of authors as well. We've published 15, 16 authors. So waterhousepress.com. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on our podcast today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go get some lunch.
2, 1,
Thank you for listening, Storytellers. Wherever you are on your journey and whatever brought you here, we encourage you to tell your story. Tell lots of stories. Now get out there and find your stage.
The Emerald Coast Storytellers podcast is produced in partnership with Sowell House, whose mission is to house creative culture by supporting the individuals who shape it.
Follow them on Instagram @SowellHouse or visit their website, sowellhouse.com, to learn more.